Hello and welcome to the Underscore podcast. I'm Rick Clark. This is episode 9, and today we're diving into one of the most distinctive and emotionally devastating musical worlds in modern screen storytelling, The Last of Us. And this episode also marks the release of our new album, Music from The Last of Us, performed by London Music Works and Nick Squires, out on March 27th via Silver Screen Records. Now, this album brings together music from the original video games and the first 2 seasons of the HBO adaptation, with music rooted in the haunting sound world created by Gustavo Santaolalla. Now, there are some scores that announce themselves immediately. They arrive with force. They tell you how big the world is, how high the stakes are, how epic everything is supposed to feel. And then there are scores like The Last of Us, scores that barely seem to raise their voice at all. Scores that creep in through texture, through silence, through the sound of wood and string and air. Scores that feel less like accompaniment and more like memory, less like commentary and more like emotional residue. That to me is what makes this music so extraordinary. It doesn't just support the story, it seems to carry its scars. And the fascinating thing is that this didn't come from the most obvious place. Because when Naughty Dog began work on the original The Last of Us, they were already famous for Uncharted, and a series full of movement, spectacle, wit, and cinematic momentum. But with The Last of Us, the studio pivoted toward something much more intimate, much more severe, and much more emotionally raw. The game launched on June 14th, 2013. And from the beginning, it was clear that this was aiming for a different kind of narrative experience, one built as much on vulnerability and loss as on action and survival. And that shift mattered musically, because if you're making a game about a ruined America, a fungal apocalypse, brutal violence, moral compromise, and a slow, reluctant bond between Joel and Ellie, you could easily imagine the score leaning into scale, into darkness, into tension, into the usual post-apocalyptic machinery. But instead, Naughty Dog and Sony reached for something stranger and more personal. They approached Gustavo Santaolalla, whose music had already left a huge mark in film, and whose work the team had been using as part of the tonal reference for the project during pre-production. Naughty Dog has spoken about how Santaolalla's music appeared multiple times in their early reference folders, even though bringing him onto a video game initially felt like a long shot, not least because he had never scored a game before. That decision was a masterstroke, because Santaolalla was not the obvious blockbuster games composer. He didn't arrive out of the traditional orchestral adventure mold. He brought with him a very different sensibility, one shaped by songwriting, record production, Latin American folk textures, and film work that understood how to do enormous emotional damage with the lightest possible touch. Before The Last of Us, he had already won back-to-back Academy Awards for Best Original Score for Brokeback Mountain and Babel, which gives you some idea of the emotional terrain he was operating in. This was a composer who understood restraint, space, fragility, and unresolved feeling. He wasn't there to turn the game into a thrill ride. He was there to deepen its humanity, and central to that sound is the ronroco. If there is one instrument that has become inseparable from The Last of Us, it is this one. The ronroco, with its dry, intimate, slightly haunted timbre, gives the score its fingerprint. It sounds old, it sounds weathered, it sounds human. Not polished, not pristine, not emotionally armoured. It sounds like something that has survived. That's the genius of this score, really. It doesn't sound like civilization collapsing. It sounds like what's left afterward. It sounds like memory trying to hold itself together. And because of that, The Last of Us immediately carved out a very different identity from other game scores of its era. This was music built from fragments, repeated figures, suspended phrases, short themes that don't resolve in a triumphal way. Instead, they hang in the air. They leave you with space around the notes, and in The Last of Us, that space is everything. It's grief, it's dread, it's tenderness, it's the emotional cost of just continuing to exist. That's why the main theme is so powerful, and it's not showy, it's not over-arranged, it doesn't need to be, it just arrives and somehow it already feels like loss. And that's maybe the best way to understand Santolala's contribution to this franchise. He gave it a sound that was inseparable from its moral world, a sound that refused heroism in the traditional sense, a sound that made room for exhaustion, compromise, longing, and love. Because The Last of Us is not really about monsters, not primarily. It's about people carrying unbearable things. The 2013 game established that immediately, and by the time The Last of Us Part 2 arrived in June 2020, that musical language had become so embedded in the identity of the series that it was impossible to imagine the franchise without it. And Part 2, as players know, pushes the emotional register even further. It is more fractured, more relentless, more grief-stricken, and musically it expands the palette while still staying faithful to that stripped-back emotional DNA. That's one of the things I find most impressive about this body of work as a whole. It evolves, but it never betrays itself. Part 2 is bigger in scope, darker in many ways, and more psychologically splintered. But the music still feels recognizably born of the same soil, the same wounded quiet, same refusal to oversell emotion, same understanding that devastation often lands hardest when the music almost seems to be holding back. And then, of course, came the television adaptation. Whenever a beloved game makes the jump to television or film, there is always that underlying anxiety. Can it survive the translation? Can it keep what made it special? Can it avoid becoming flattened prestige TV approximation of something more interactive and more alive? In this case, the answer was yes, and one of the reasons is that the adaptation was built with unusually strong continuity. The HBO series was created by Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann, with Druckmann bringing direct continuity from the games and Santolala himself returning to score the series. That mattered enormously. It meant the adaptation didn't just borrow the brand, it retained the musical soul of the thing. That continuity is everything. Because game music and television scoring do not function in the same way. In games, music has to breathe around player movement, discovery, threat, waiting, failure, and repetition. It often lives in loops, stems, fragments, and triggers. In television, the frame is fixed, the pacing is fixed, the dramatic contour is locked. And yet, Santaolala's music crossed over beautifully. The HBO version kept that same haunted sparseness, that same emotional economy, that same sense that one note too many might damage the whole effect. And because the series understood not to overcompensate, the score retained its force. It stayed intimate, it stayed bruised, it stayed recognizably The Last of Us. And that brings me to this album. What we wanted to do with music from The Last of Us was not simply make these themes larger for the sake of it. The point was not to inflate music that has always thrived on restraint. The point was to honor its emotional core while giving it a new life in album form. So rather than treating the score as something that needed improving or grandifying, the aim was to stay close to what makes it special. Its fragility, its humanity, its closeness to the bone. There are the two additional songs on the album, which are especially associated with the television adaptation. The first is Max Richter's On the Nature of Daylight. This appears in the heartbreaking closing stretch of Bill and Frank's story in the series, and it is one of the most emotionally overwhelming uses of pre-existing music in the adaptation. Richter's piece already carries a profound sense of sorrow and transcendence, but in that context it becomes almost unbearable in the best possible way. It turns the ending of that story into something at once intimate and monumental, not just tragic, but tender. The second non-score track on the album is a-ha's Take On Me, and I love that this is here because it represents a completely different kind of emotional register. In the series, the song appears in the scene where Ellie sings to Dina in Seattle, a rare pause in the surrounding brutality, a small pocket of warmth and vulnerability in a world that rarely allows it. It's one of those scenes that fans latched onto instantly because it reminds you that The Last of Us, for all its violence and grief, is also about fleeting human connection. For this album, that song is reimagined in a more stripped-back way with guitar and cello carrying the heart of it, which feels exactly right for this world. And that perhaps is the thread running through the whole album. Not scale, not spectacle, not nostalgia for its own sake, but emotional truth. Because this music has endured not just because the franchise is beloved, though of course it is. It has endured because Santaolala found a language for something a lot of scores fail to capture: the exhausted, fragile, half-broken texture of being alive after catastrophe. That's why the main theme stays with people. That's why the Ronroku stays with people. That's why these cues continue to resonate outside the games and outside the series. They don't just remind you of plot. They remind you of feeling, They remind you of the ache of Joel and Ellie's journey. They remind you of the emotional violence of part 2. They remind you of the stillness and grief and tenderness of the HBO adaptation. They remind you that some of the most powerful music in modern storytelling is also some of the quietest. So, whether you first encountered this music through the PlayStation games or through the television adaptation, or whether this album is actually your first doorway into the sound of The Last of Us, I hope this release gives you the chance to hear just how beautifully constructed this musical world really is. And more than anything, it understands that in stories like this, music doesn't have to shout to devastate you. Sometimes all it takes is a handful of notes, a little wooden string, a pause, a breath, and suddenly the whole world is there. Thanks for listening to episode 9 of the Underscore podcast. I'm Rick Clark, and I'll see you next time.